And a special thanks for making me guest of honor the first time in my 70-odd years. So that makes this a very special, an extraordinary event. Now, I do not have a thesis as such. I was impressed by Professor Banerjee's very up-to-the-minute discourse about the problems facing us today. Mine is a more sort of broad and rather rambling talk on the subject that you mentioned, nationality and other difficulties. Now, when I read your flyer and saw the title, I inwardly groaned when I read The Agonies of Nationhood. You see, the title seems to limit us to the discontents and burdens associated with the nation. And the subtitle lays open the possibility of another kind of discontent, cultural reflections from the Indian subcontinent. I was reminded that naming can be a contentious issue. After partition, E.M. Forster bemoaned the appropriation of the name India by the Republic of India. Till then, India had meant the subcontinent as a whole, and Forster couldn't reconcile himself to this attenuation of meaning. I can well imagine someone somewhere asking irately how India can appropriate the entire subcontinent. This dire possibility explains why we have the increasing use of the label South Asia. A parallel case is that of the word Hindustan, a region that Muhammad Iqbal claimed to be his homeland and that is celebrated in a famous song. After partition, Hindustan acquired an antagonistic opposite in Pakistan. And when we belonged to East Pakistan, we were taught that our country was part of the Indo-Pak subcontinent. Hyphenation in the name of any entity, it seems, is the punctuation mark that indicates an ontological unease. It's all a question of usage, of course. If we all accept that the Indian subcontinent or Hindustan is the entire subcontinent, there will be no carping over nomenclature. Problems arise only if one of the constituent countries lays exclusive claim to the name. We can even create complications unawares. I will illustrate this with reference to a writer and a book I greatly admire. Mr. Shashi Tharoor made history with his Oxford Union speech, arguing for the motion that Britain owes reparations to her former colonies. It put paid to all attempts to justify the empire on the premise of its benevolence. Mr. Tharoor did not ask for reparations commensurate with the losses the subcontinent had suffered because of colonial rapacity, but only a token of £1 per annum for 200 years by way of atonement. In the book published as a follow-up, An Era of Darkness, he makes it clear that when he speaks for India, it is colonial India, which today lies split into 3 states. Bangladesh and Pakistan, if the wish, can adopt the case he makes in the book. Logical enough, but there are limits to Mr. Tharoor's inclusivity. In course of presenting the tangled history of the Kohinoor diamonds, peregrinations ending in the crown of the Queen Mother, and the demand often raised for its return to its rightful location, Mr. Tharoor notes that Indians consider their claim self-evident, whereas there are other claimants, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. He dismisses Pakistan's claim because the argument that the last pre-British owner, the Sikh kingdom, had its capital in Lahore, is flimsy because there are no Sikhs anymore there. As an avowed nationalist, Mr. Tharoor would like to see items of cultural significance in India returned as an expression of regret for the depredations of imperialism. One cannot help feeling that as an Indian nationalist, he would like to regard the Republic of India as the sole successor state to the British Raj. I have a niggling suspicion that Mr. Tharoor, when he suggested a token annual reparation of £1, saw it being paid to the Treasury of the Republic of India. Considering population ratios, India can legitimately claim 70p, and splitting the rest into two halves, Bangladesh can surely claim 15p. I'm being facetious, of course. But I think Mr. Tharoor's nationalism stands in the way of an inclusive vision of Indian civilization. This becomes clear in chapter 2, where he tries to refute the British claim that they created the political unity of India, that the very idea of India as one entity, now three, but one during the British Raj, instead of multiple warring principalities and statelets, is the unchallengeable contribution of British imperial rule. He is at pains to prove that Indians have always had a strong centripetal force working amidst them, leading to the creation of large empires, and that even without British imperialism, India would have evolved into a modern nation state. But why this obsession with the nation state? One nation state or three or more, the subcontinent would still retain its civilizational identity. Mr. Tharoor acknowledges the civilizational unity, but doesn't seem to appreciate that it can come under threat from the modern nationalism associated with the Westphalian nation state. And as a result, what we find in the culture of the Indian subcontinent today is a lamentable partitioning of the mind. And in literary studies, for example, we do not have a unified critical framework for the entire subcontinent. We talk of Indian literature, Pakistani literature, Bangla literature, but again, in West Bengal, by Bangla literature focuses essentially on West Bengali writing and Bangladeshi literature, etc. It's relevant to refer in this context to the Q&A at the session on the book An Era of Darkness at Column 2017. I would like you to tell us, a young woman in the audience asked, whether Indians are actually losing their right to complain about their colonial history now that they are pursuing their colonial ambitions all over South Asia. It took Mr. Tharoor by surprise, and as you know, surprise is often expressed by laughter. Ha ha, he said, are we, etc., etc., and asked for examples. She mentioned 3 countries where she claimed India was trying to play Big Brother. I think you are being a little unfair, my dear, came the reply. And I'm surprised there was no radical feminist in the audience to protest at the patronizing "my dear" so often used on young women by men in positions of authority. And I cannot also help imagine thinking that the tone he adopted is very much what an Englishman might have in responding to his speech and saying, oh dear, aren't you being a little unfair on us? Mr. Tharoor continued, the fact is that all big countries have this problem, and he drew an analogy with the United States and its small neighbors, and quoted the wonderful Mexican statesman Porfirio Diaz, who memorably said, poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States. Thus, Mr. Tharoor unwittingly deconstructed himself, for Diaz had said that in the context of his struggle against acts of US interference, which Americans undertook on the basis of their Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary. I mention all this as an observer, a non-nationalist Bangladeshi citizen, to underscore the dangers that lie in relations between countries, big countries and big countries, as we see today on the global scene, between small countries, between big countries and small countries, when they are motivated by strong nationalism. And yet, the national question can loom large in the consciousness of any people under certain historical circumstances, as it did in my country in 1971. Politics, economics, culture came together to pose an existential choice to the 70 million people of East Bengal. Born in 1950, Even as a very small boy, I felt a tension between being a Pakistani and a Bengali. Playing with coevals, we would chant a language movement slogan demanding one, the recognition of Bangla as a state language, and two, the head of the chief minister at the time of the 21st February shootings, the famous Ekushe. In time, we became aware of the economic exploitation of the province. I remember buying a booklet for 6 annas, I was 12 at the time, titled Bhagyo Virambito Purbo Pakistan, the East Pakistan forsaken by fate, which showed with appropriate statistics how foreign exchange earned through jute exports were being used for development projects in West Pakistan. Thorough economic analysis paved the way to the 6-point demand for autonomy. After Ayub Khan's fall in 1969, his successor, General Yahya, organized the first national election at the end of 1970, and the Awami League won a majority, having swept up nearly all the seats in East Pakistan. In January 1971, as one of the 3 winners in an All-Pakistan poetry contest organized by the USIS, I went to Lahore for the prize giving and a reading. The people I met told me they were waiting for Sheikh Mujibur Rahman to take over as Pakistan's Prime Minister, Pakistan's first democratically elected Prime Minister. Soon after my return to Dhaka, things began to turn sour. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto refused to accept the election results and to accept Sheikh Mujib as Prime Minister. Yahya launched pointless talks between the contending parties while surreptitiously carrying on a military buildup. And on the night of the 25th of March, a brutal crackdown and the arrest of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman finished off Pakistan. It faced us with an existential choice. One could lie low, bow down to the occupying army, try to get out of the country, or join the resistance that sprang up spontaneously and with Indian help grew in strength over the months. I joined the resistance. This was the only choice that would make me feel that my existence was authentic. And after undergoing a crash course of military training, I commanded a company in battle. When we were fighting, we had one aim: to drive the occupation army out, to fly the Bangladesh flag over Dhaka. There was no time for ideological debates. These and the formulation of constitutional principles came after victory had been achieved. And one has to admit, the ideological questions have not been fully resolved. I have said elsewhere that it was a people's war. Ordinary villagers, not all literate, made up my company. There were just a few who had completed high school, and they were driven by resentment and idealism. The idealism was a naive belief that independence would usher in a utopia. I tried to disabuse them, knowing full well what struggles awaited us after the devastations of the war. To no avail. The heartbreak they suffered was inevitable. And only now, after all these years, do they get a half-decent monthly allowance. The resentment has to do with the psychological damage wrought by colonialism. The process of strengthening colonial ideology after the 1857 uprising has been thoroughly documented. Since the rebels came mainly from the Gangetic Plains, the British stopped recruiting soldiers in this region, labeling its inhabitants as non-martial races, and now recruited mainly from the peoples who had remained loyal in the Punjab and the hills. They were lauded as the martial races. Kipling amply demonstrates the stereotyping in his writings. After partition, the martial Punjabis and Pathans, having imbibed the racism of their former masters, looked down upon the non-martial Bengalis of East Pakistan. The reaction in 1971 was predictable, anti-racist racism. To the resistance, anyone who didn't look Bengali was suspect. One of my friends, who was on his way to joining the resistance, and who unfortunately did not conform to the physical stereotype of the dark and diminutive Bengali, was killed by those who wanted to join. In Bangladesh's national narrative, there's a clear line of development from the language movement through the movement for autonomy to the independence war. Bangla is central to the nation's self-image. spirited lobbying led to the UNESCO's recognition of the 21st of February as International Mother Language Day. A salutary fallout of this has been growing awareness of our linguistic multiplicity. According to one count, there are 38 languages in Bangladesh. All of them deserve respectful attention and study and acceptance as valuable parts of our cultural mosaic. We even have a group of Urdu writers who hold regular mushairas. It is worth pointing out that some of our Urdu writers spoke out in support of the Bangla language movement in 1952. Now, as soon as the war ended, I think what is now known as the demographic dividend manifested itself in a somewhat different way, an urge to get out of the country. That too has continued to this day. And in fact, it's a trend that is increasing day by day as the trend of transnationality, globalization also increase. And so there are Bangladeshis everywhere, as Amitav Ghosh's Gun Island, a wonderful narrative which shows how a novelist can deal with the issues of today, blending the Monosha legends, the high-tech world of internet communication, the underworld of human trafficking, and the perilous existence of so-called illegal immigrants. At times, and rightly, attention is drawn to the relations between the Bangla language in the two Bengals. That there are great variations in the Bangla spoken in different districts is inevitable. But there is a perceived opposition between Kolkata and Dhaka, as was reflected in a debate at the Kolkata Literary Meet last year on the topic Bangla culture, Dhaka versus Kolkata. The motion being that Kolkata represented Bangla's past glory, Dhaka its future. Points made by two of the speakers against the motion deserve attention. The artist Shubho Prasanna contemptuously dismissed as un-Bengali the use of words in Bangladesh like ji or khala and kalu. And it seems he was obviously unaware that the Muslims of West Bengal, who comprise 30% of the population, use these words as well. And in Bangladesh, the Hindu community, which that now makes up 10%, use mashi pishi, but also use ji. What is there to object in such usage? It's all a question of usage. And another speaker, the writer Shopnamoy Chakraborty, while lauding Kolkata's absorption into Bangla usage of un-Bengali expressions like Juk Juk Jio or Durga Mai Ki Jai or Le Halwa, couldn't stomach this bit of doggerel from Bangladesh. Bangla Amar Kolijare Bhai, Bangla Amar Jan, Gul Bagichai Bulbuli De, Fajr Azan. So it's not the fact that this is doggerel that he objected to, but the use of certain words like Fajr Azan and Jan. Now, no comment is necessary regarding this kind of thing, this kind of attitude. But this sort of, it has its counterparts in Bangladesh as well. I remember reading an article by an eminent intellectual who's passed away not long ago, in which he complained that the West Bengali writers did not regard Bangladeshis as Bengalis. And he referred to the first page of Srikanto, where famously the narrator mentions that at a football match between the Bengali boys and the Musalman Cheles boys, there was a rumpus, and Indro helped him go, move to safety. Now, again, it's all a question of usage. In East Bengal, no writer, no Hindu writer would have used this particular form of, if in the West Bengal usage of that time, there was a distinction between Bengali and Musulman, meaning Bengali-speaking Musulman. It's just a matter of the way the language is used. I mean, it does not reflect any deeper prejudice. So underlying this piquant debate is the question of the dominance of Kolkata as the source of modern literary Bengali. Yes, modern literary Bengali developed in Kolkata for historical reasons, because the East India Company set up its Bengal headquarters there. There had been talk before that of setting up the factory in Chittagong, briefly, and that was not done. Now, imagine what shape modern literary Bangla would have then assumed, or for that matter, what the geopolitical map would have been like today if Chittagong had become the capital of the Bengal presidency and subsequently of British India. Kolkata's dominance over the modern Bengali literary scene has had the unfortunate result, pointed out by Sudipta Kaviraj in an essay in Sheldon Pollock's anthology, Literary Cultures and History, that the Muslim contribution to pre-colonial Bangla literature is not given due, is not properly studied, has not been properly studied. And one could, in fact, say in general that pre-colonial Bangla literature has not received due attention. And this in the works written by Hindu and Muslim writers. This is what led me to produce the composite prose retelling of the Triumph of the Snake Goddess, which is a retelling of the Manusha legends. And I hope to continue with other texts. For example, the Nobi Bangsho of Syed Sultan, 16th century text, which beautifully exemplifies the way Sufism in Bengal created a synthetic literature. And it would wonderfully illustrate Ashish Nandi's comment that Islam in the subcontinent has been an extremely creative cultural manifestation. So in that book, which is which gives biographical accounts of all the prophets and down to the Prophet of Islam. Among the prophets, we find Hari or Vishnu. So Vishnu is dealt with as one of the prophets sent to mankind. So this kind of syncretism, we know it was there as a colorful manifestation of our culture, but we do not, I think, pay much attention to these, whereas I think if we did, the act of reading critically these texts would have made us more liberal in our cultural outlook. Another point that Kaviraj makes to conclude his essay is to note the rise of English as the favored language of creative and cultural expression among Bengalis. This is true. This is not true to the same extent in Bangladesh, but even there is a growing body of writing in English, even though, unlike India, Bangladesh, and it's also true of Pakistan, I believe, the role of the English language in the national culture has not been officially acknowledged or specified, whereas India has accepted English as an Indian language. which has led to a degree of freedom from certain unnecessary agitation. I remember in the 60s, this Angrezi Hatao movement in India. So that, I think, that kind of thing has stopped as a result of incorporating English into the sort of linguistic spectrum of India. In Bangladesh, it is the de facto second language of the educated classes, but there is no official, and even in the courts, in the High Court, for example, the judgment, the arguments, the judgments are in English, but the language has not been, given any official recognition as such. Oscar Wilde once quipped that the only thing one can do with history is rewrite it. If we remember this, we will be less prone to consider anything to have absolute validity. Take, for instance, the received narrative of the departure of the British. Today, even a Nehruvian nationalist like Mr. Tharoor acknowledges that it is increasingly argued that Gandhi could embarrass the British, but not overthrow them. It was when soldiers who had sworn their loyalty to the British crown rebelled during the Second World War, and when sailors of the Royal Indian Navy mutinied and fired their own cannons at British government installations, that the British realized the game was up. Mr. Tharoor does not mention who led the rebels in World War II and who was the inspiration behind the naval mutiny. It was, of course, India's lost leader, after whom the institution hosting this conference is named. I'm proud to be a participant at this conference, and I hope all the succeeding sessions will all be very interesting, energizing, stimulating, and inspire further debate and discussion on a topic that is of tremendous significance. Thank you very much.